Greetings in Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint a Tyranid combat patrol.
Let's go.
Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, we are going to continue our monthly combat patrol challenge by tackling the Tyranid's combat patrol box. But first, I want to talk very briefly about Undokai. Undokai is the annual intramural sports competition that takes place at all schools in Japan. And the school is split into red caps and white caps, and the two teams battle for point dominance in a series of head-to-head competitions like foot races or team competitions where they do things like work together to make a very large and awkward ball pass through an obstacle course. But more interesting than the competition is the very Japanese aspect of the unified performance. Now, this teaches the children that competition is great, but it's also important to band together and work towards a common unified goal. The last thing I want to show you is this: a dedicated area for stepladders so the fathers can see over the crowd to record their children's performance. And that's Undokai, a very big part of the school year in Japan. Let's talk about Tyranids. Now, I've been collecting Tyranids for over 10 years. It was my first army outside of a starter box, and honestly, it's my one true love in the hobby. And if you've been following the channel for any time at all, you'll remember that this summer, I painted the Screamer Killer from the Leviathan starter box. And given that we need to continue our monthly combat patrol challenge, I thought mid-November would be a great opportunity to tackle the Tyranids. Let me show you how I built and painted a Tyranid combat patrol. I grabbed these Ripper Swarms from my collection. One of my first videos was making them swarmier using 3D printing. The new termigants sculpts included in the combat patrol are obviously a marked improvement from the old sculpts, but I already have a massive Tyranid collection, and I'm going to be honest here, I've painted over 60 of these things, so there's no way I'm going to paint another termigant as long as I live. Look closely at the ones I completed years ago, and you'll see that the tails on each one are individually bent using a heat gun. So we're going to consider these good enough, and using the airbrush, simply add a gradient with some Druchii Violet on the shoulders and the tail. Moving on to the first new unit in the combat patrol are the barbgaunts. Now this is a new bioform within the Tyranid force. It's just been introduced in 10th edition. My disappointment here is that all 5 models are very samey. There's not a lot of variation in the poses, and so you end up with 5 models that look the same. You end up basically painting the same model 5 times, which isn't really that enjoyable. Now, I'll walk you through the process and how I paint all of my Tyranids, and you're going to see that repeated in several of the life forms here, whether it's these barbgaunts or the leapers. So as we go through, I'll explain the different steps. But primarily, it's about laying down a primer coat, doing a quick zenithal with 2 different browns, then doing a wash, and then moving on to painting the carapace. It's not what I would consider a speed painting technique, but I have perfected it over many years and hundreds of models to help me get them done a little more quickly. Here on the back of this carapace, I'm just using a dry brush of purple to bring out all the details in the dorsal spines. But when it comes to the smaller areas where I don't want to accidentally get purple on the exoskeleton, I'm going to go ahead and use a brush to apply that. Once we've separated all the armor panels and gotten our skin tones down, I'm going to go through here, and the accent color on my army is this fluorescent green punch. It's been a part of the army since I started it nearly 10 years ago, and I'm just going to put that on with an airbrush. It's okay in this case if we get a little overspray because I want this to look like it's glowing with an energy. So if it spills over onto the carapace or the other parts of the skin, that's okay. Then we'll just go through with some Bealtan green wash here and apply that to the recesses to help define the shapes. Once that's done, we're just going to finish the base with a quick layer of Astro Granite, a dry brush, and then paint the rim Steel Legion Drab. Moving next to the Von Ryan's Leapers, this is another new bioform within the army introduced in 10th edition. And to be honest, I was a bit surprised. When everyone saw these, they thought they were new lictors, and then they realized the scale was considerably smaller. And then it wasn't until a few weeks later that they introduced the new lictor models. I really like these, and the thing I like most about these is the difference in the poses. Each one is different. It's not like painting the same model 3 times. They have these subtle little differences in the armor plating and the tips of their tails, as well as their heads and things like that. So they're a genuine joy to paint. You'll notice something strange about the bases, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later. This is this week's sponsor, Epic Basing. I've partnered with them, and they've given me some files, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in detail later on. Now, to add that little green accent color on these leapers, I've gone ahead and airbrushed the feeder tendrils on their face. This is something that happens elsewhere in my army as well, on the Venom Thropes and Yamaro Gene Stealers. Once I've got the carapace painted black, I'm going to use this purple here and a very fine brush to just go through and highlight the armor panels. Once that's all set though, the trick to really separating these is then taking a 000 brush and some purple and white mixed together to create an additional accent color, and then putting that on just the very edges of the panels to help them pop and sort of separate. The final step on these is darkening the tips of the scything talons. This is, again, one of those small details that carries throughout my entire army. And here I'm just using my thumb to block off the model to make sure no overspray gets on any of the other areas. Moving on to the winged Tyranid Prime. At first I wasn't really crazy about the pose on this model with the wings folded down, but you can see where they've tried to sort of minimize the silhouette, make it easier to store and carry with you. And honestly, the pose kind of grew on me. I've kept the wings separate here for ease of painting. Initially, I dry fit them and realized there would be several places on the body that would be very difficult to get to. And as an HQ, we really want to bring it up to that next level and sort of pull out some of the stops. So in this case, we'll take the extra effort. So I kept those in sub-assemblies, applied my different washes and then airbrush paints, and then just went through and started dry brushing the model. When I dry brush the exoskeletons here, or the outer skin, it's actually a combination of 2-to-1 white to Ushabti bone, and then I make sure that I'm using a soft makeup brush and just using a very light touch to make sure that I don't get any streaking or chalkiness on the model. Here I'm using Vallejo Black. It gives really great single coat coverage, flows really well, doesn't clog up any details. And once I've got the carapace painted, again, I'm just going to dry brush a purple here to hit all those highlights really quickly and easily. And then I'll start separating all the carapace panels using those purples. On all of my creatures here, there's sort of these freckles or dimples wherever a joint meets the body, so I'll go through and paint these on, and then afterwards we're going to use the airbrush and that Druchii Violet in order to create a gradient. I'm going to do the same thing on the wings here to give them some visual interest and just keep them from looking sort of monocolor. And then this is another small signature on my army. All of these sort of vents in the skin are painted using a very watered-down dark elf flesh from Vallejo. Brings out the details, just sort of does it in one shot. Then I'll use a cold gray to base coat my claws and scything talons, just being careful where the talons meet the exoskeleton. And then we're going to get that accent of green pop in the tongue that's sticking out. And then we want to finish up all of the details on the legs by using that light purple and a very fine brush to separate all the carapace panels and make those pop. We'll apply 2 layers of Ushabti bone to the arms to cover the gradients from the airbrush, and using Tamiya Thin, we'll attach the wings to the body. With those set in place, we'll go ahead and shade the Ushabti bone using our recipe. Here it's 2 parts Lamian Medium, 1 part Agrax Earthshade, and then I went through with a brush and brought back all of our highlights using that combination of white and Ushabti bone. Once that one was done, I went ahead and applied the other wing. Here, I've just glued that in place, and once that's set, again, we'll use 2 coats of Ushabti bone to cover the gradient from the airbrush that was on the membrane. And then, instead of brushing in all of our highlights after we did our wash, I just went ahead and dry brushed them on here. It's okay if some of that gets on the pink of the wings. It's going to unify the color, make all the details in the membrane pop as well. As a final touch, I'll use the airbrush to darken the tips of the scything talons. Now, an HQ unit deserves a special base, and I went to Cults, found this really great 3D scanned rock, brought that into my slicing program, scaled it up, and printed it out. Glued that to the base along with some of those really great pieces from Epic Basing, and set about painting it. I love dry brushing rocks. It's one of my favorite things in the hobby. One of my other favorite things is creating some OSL or object source lighting using an airbrush. Here I'm just using a fluorescent green to make these sort of alien growths pop. We'll paint the rim of the base. Now, because the model is plastic and our printed base is resin, we need to use super glue to join the two of those. So we'll apply that, peg the model in, and it's all set. The final model in the kit is the one that I am most excited to paint, and that is the monstrous creature, the Psychophage. Monstrous creatures are what got me into the hobby. I saw my first Tyrannifex and I was like, okay, I'm in, just all in. So I was very excited to tackle this one. Anytime I get the chance to do a showcase model like this is really special. Now, on the abdomen here, this really large sort of fleshy sac on the back, we're going to use some skin tones there, as well as the tendrils that we see in the front here. And we're going to shade the tendrils as well as the poison sac with some Reikland flesh shade. And then we'll go through and shade the carapace, again with that mix of Lamian medium and Agrax earth shade. Once those are all dry, we'll go through and dry brush the model. Here on the tendrils, I'm just going to use that skin tone mixed with a little white to bring out the highlights, and then the same thing on the abdomen, making sure to bring out all the details. Switching over to the exoskeleton, we're going to use white and Ushabti bone, making sure we get the underside as well. You'll notice I haven't mounted this model to the base. That's for two reasons. One, it makes it easier to get to some of those surfaces and details that are along the bottom. And two, we've got something special planned for the base, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Here, I'm using the airbrush to add some gradients to the tendrils. We're going to bring in that green accent effect. And here along the abdomen, I'm assuming these are some sort of poison gas ports, so we're going to bring some of that accent color in there as well. And we'll start moving on to some of the other details in the model, including the many teeth in its maw. We'll go ahead and add some green accents to the poison vents in its abdomen and start painting the carapace black. And at this stage, it would be easier if this was on a base. So it's a great opportunity to talk about this week's sponsor, Epic Basing. Epic Basing is a one-stop shop for taking your figural bases to the next level. Not only do they have hundreds of different designs from shattered imperial cities all the way to crystal forests and alien fauna, but they sell resin prints as well as 3D STL files. When I reached out to partner with them, they very graciously accepted and sent me these really cool files for all of these weird alien growths that are perfect for a Tyranid army. As you've seen throughout this video, I printed out dozens of these in different sizes and configurations and attached them to the bases of all of the different models we've been working on this week. The quality of the sculpts here is really great. It brings everything to the next level, and I'm really excited to have partnered with them. Check the links in the description below for their online store. Now, to fill the space in between all of this alien growth, we're going to use some PVA glue and some sand. You could use a technical or texture paste paint here, but at the size that this base is, you'd probably end up using 2 bottles. Once that's all set, we'll dry brush those rocks with like a combination of white and light grays to bring up the highlights, and then attach the model. Now that the model is attached, we can go through and finish the carapace. Here I'm using the airbrush to bring in some purples along the larger panels of the carapace and the tips of the dorsal protrusions. And once we've airbrushed in all of our purples, we'll go ahead and use that really fine brush and those purples to start separating all of the carapace panels by highlighting the edges of them. The last thing we need to do here is color in the noxious fumes pouring forth from the dorsal protrusions, and we'll just use the airbrush here. It's okay if we get some overspray here, it just looks like object source lighting, and we'll finish that by dry brushing some darker greens along the top. And there you have it. My Hive Fleet unending maw continues to grow and spread its tendrils across the galaxy. I love Tyranids. This was an absolute joy to paint, and some of the new models like the Psychophage are just amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, check out our Patreon linked in the description below. Joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other become better with honest and kind feedback every day. And it's because of the financial support of my patrons that I'm able to go out and purchase things like the 10th edition starter box. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, please take a sec to like, comment, or subscribe, drive us to the front page of YouTube, and help us grow our subscriber base. Or you can always check out our t-shirt shop, bakingsodatees.com, where I design one-of-a-kind, unique shirts available nowhere else, shipped directly to you. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.